French involvement in the American Revolution of 1776 was a costly affair that left the country in a state of near bankruptcy. King Louis's extravagant spending also did not help matters. Empty royal coffers, poor harvests, and a raise in the food prices had created feelings of unrest among the poor rural and urban populace. The matter was further worsened by the imposition of taxes that provided no relief. As a result, rioting, looting, and general strikes became the norm. Towards the end of 1786, a universal land tax was proposed by the Controller General Charles Alexandre de Calonne. This tax reform would no longer exempt the privileged classes like the clergy and the nobility, as had been the case for centuries. The king summoned the States General to pass these measures. The States General was an assembly that represented the French nobility, clergy, and the middle class. The last time that States General was called was in 1614. The date of the meeting was fixed on May 5, 1789, where grievances of the three states would be presented to the king. Let's discuss about what were the causes of French Revolution 1789. So basically, there were four causes of French Revolution: social, economic, political, and intellectual. So the social conditions in France in the late 18th century were extremely unequal and expoliative. The clergy and the nobility formed the first two states and were the most privileged classes in the French society. They were exempt from the payment of taxes to the state. And on the other hand, the third state, which consisted of peasants and workers, formed the majority of the population. They were burdened with excessive taxes with no political and social rights. As a result, they were extremely discontent. And as a result of numerous wars waged by Louis XVI, the state coffers were empty. The situation was made even more complex by the France's involvement in the American War of Independence and faulty system of taxation. While the privileged classes were excused from the paying taxes, then the third estate was more and more burdened with them. The Bourbon King of France, Louis XVI, was extremely autocratic and weak-willed king who led a life of obscene luxury. This led to a lot of disenchantment among the masses, who then were leading a life of extreme poverty and widespread hunger. The 18th century was marked by a conscious refusal by French thinkers of divine rights theory. Philosophers like Rousseau rejected the absolute monarchy of promulgated the doctrine of equality of man and sovereignty of people. They played a pivotal role in exposing the fault lines of the old political system, example, the ancient regime, and articulating the popular discontent. Now let's talk about the 5 stages of French Revolution. So stage number 1 states the meeting of the States General. Despite the non-aristocratic members outnumbering the aristocrats in the terms of population, yet they could be outvoted by the other two bodies. Before the meeting of the States General on May 5, members of the third estate, as the non-aristocratic class was known, began to mobilize the support of equal voting rights, which would be based on the head and not by the status. While the middle class believed that fiscal judicial reform was the need of the hour, the nobles were against the idea of giving up privileges they had enjoyed under the traditional system. When the meeting was convinced, the question over the voting process turned to open hostility between the three orders. Thus, the original purpose of the meeting and the authority of the king who called for it being neglected. With further talks having failed, the third estate met alone and formally adopted the title of National Assembly on June 17, 1789. They gathered in a nearby indoor tennis court and took the oath of office. This oath was known as the Tennis Court Oath. The members of this new assembly vowed not to disperse until reforms had been initiated. Seeing no other option, Louis XVI had to absorb to the three assemblies into the new order. The second stage states the French Revolution begins. The National Assembly continued to meet at Versailles. In the meantime, fear and violence had consumed Paris. speculations went around regarding an imminent military coup. This led to an insurgency which resulted in taking the Bastille fortress on July 14, 1789. This event marked the beginning of the French Revolution. A wave of revolutionary fervor spread throughout the countryside, which led into a peasant revolt that saw many homes of tax collectors as burnt, as well as of those the aristocratic themselves. The rebellions caused the nobles of the country to flee en masse. This period was known as the Great Fear, when the National Assembly finally dealt a fatal blow to feudalism on August 4, 1789. The old order had finally ended. Stage number 3. The Declaration of Rights of Men. The National Assembly adopted the Rights of Men and the Citizen on August 4, 1789. The charter was grounded on democratic principles, drawing from the philosophical as well as political ideas of Enlightenment thinkers like Jacques Rousseau. The declaration was published on August 26, 1789. The Constitution was adopted on September 3, 1791. It symbolized a new French society where the king would have limited powers, with a moderate assembly wielding the most power. This, however, was not enough for the radical elements of the assembly like George Danton and Maximilien de Robespierre, who demanded a trial of the king and a more republican form. The French Constitution was adopted on September 3, 1791, although it was moderate in its stance by the limiting powers of the king. It was not enough for more radical members of the assembly like Maximilien de Robespierre, who wanted Louis to stand trial. Stage number 4. Region of Terror. The revolution took a more radical turn when a group of insurgents attacked the royal residence in Paris and arrested Louis XVI on August 10, 1792. The following month, many who were accused of being the enemies of the revolution were massacred in Paris. Some of these included the moderate voices of the revolution. The Legislative Assembly was replaced by the National Convention, which proclaimed the establishment of the Republic of France and the abolition of the monarchy. King Louis XVI was condemned to death on January 21, 1793 and executed for treason. His wife, Marie Antoinette, would follow him 9 months later. The execution of the king marked the beginning of the most violent and turbulent phase of the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror. The National Convention was under the control of an extremist faction led by Robespierre. Under his auspices, thousands were executed for suspected treason and counter. The Reign of Terror ended with Robespierre's execution on July 28, 1794. Robespierre's death began a moderate phase during which the people of France revolted against the excess committed during the Reign of Terror. This was known as the Thermidorian reaction. Stage number 5. The end of French Revolution. On August 22, 1795, the National Convention, now composed of moderates who had survived the excess of the Reign of Terror, approved the creation of a new constitution that created France's bicameral legislature. The power would be in the hands of the Directory, a 5-member group appointed by the Parliament. Any opposition to this group was removed through the efforts of the army, now led by an upcoming and successful General Napoleon Bonaparte. The Directory's rule was marked by the financial crisis and corruption. In addition, they had ceded much of their authority to the army that helped them to stay in power. Finally, resentment against the Directory reached a fever pitch, and a coup d'état was staged by Napoleon himself. Toppling them from power, Napoleon appointed himself first consul. The French Revolution was over and the Napoleonic era was about to begin, during which time French domination of continental Europe would become the norm. Significance of the French Revolution. For all its faults, the French Revolution is highly regarded as the turning point in the modern history as the rise of new ideas steeped in liberalism, enlightenment, and democracy. These ideals were carried throughout Europe by French armies that fought many wars to preserve the Republic's existence. It inspired the common folk in Europe to race against their own monarchs in a wave of revolutionary fervor. Although most were harshly put down, the revolutions would continue in the early years of the 19th century, which saw the fall of many absolute monarchy all over Europe. Above all, the French Revolution brought to an end to feudalism and made a path for future advances in the broadly defined individual freedoms.